All right, welcome back to the program. In case you're just joining us, this is the last lap of the program. We will be looking at burning economic issues. Johnson Chukwu, the Group Managing Director at Cowry Asset Management, is joining us from London. Mr. Chukwu, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me. Good morning.
How is the Queen?
Well, the Queen is in her palace.
Okay,
I'm sure she's still mourning the death of her husband.
Yes.
So I'm not sure you want us to come and visit her
at this time, especially with this COVID, issues now. Mr. Chukwu, let's get started. Out of the potpourri of the economic issues that we have, over the weekend, even since last week, it's been hitting me left, right, and center. Over the weekend, I was like, which do I even talk about? So let's just see if we can take a look at it, at least in the next few minutes that we have. What is the most burning economic issue for you right now? Out of all the headlines you've seen, all the talk coming out, what is the most pressing for you?
Well, I think some of the key issues now, one, apart from the GDP figures that came out the previous week, then we also have the trade figures, the international foreign trade figures that just came out. Then maybe you look at the issues around the forensic audit of the NDDC. But the two critical political issues are our foreign trade position in the second quarter of this year and the GDP performance in the second quarter of this year. So I think those are the most critical economic issues we're dealing with presently.
Now, if we take a look at January 2021, we are in September. We have, let's say, about 14 weeks to the end of this year, either 14 or 15 weeks, thereabouts, to the end of this year. Can you categorize for me the good, the bad, and the ugly of 2021? Do we really have any good? If we have any good, what is the good for you? What is the bad? And perhaps what is the ugly of 2021 so far?
Okay, the good things about 2021 is that we've seen a gradual moderation in inflation rate. Inflation actually got to above 18%. We're now in the 17% region. We've seen a consistent, I think, about 4 months decline in inflation rate. We've also seen some level of improvement in GDP. We saw the first quarter GDP at 0.51% and the second quarter GDP at 5.01%. So that's also an improvement when it comes to the GDP figure. We've seen in the immediate past some stabilization in the exchange rate. In the reserve. We've seen the reserve climb slightly in the past couple of weeks. Maybe those are the hallmarks of what we've seen. Key things are one, moderation in inflation rate, and two, appreciation of improvement in the GDP growth rate. So those are two major issues. The other, on the flip side, we've seen deterioration in the exchange rates. Drastically, we've seen a deterioration to about 530 naira to $1, which affects everybody's wealth position. We've seen further deterioration in the standard of living of Nigerians. We've seen possibly an increase in the level of unemployment, though the figures have not come out. But if you look at the reality on the ground, you are likely going to see an increase in unemployment rate. And then we've also seen a worsening in the security situation, which is leading to high inflation, food inflation, which is leading to high cost of social displacement, and a lot of resources going into fighting insecurity in the country. So I think the number one challenge that is impacting on the economy is a worsening state of insecurity in the country.
Okay, if we have time, we can come back to that. Even if we don't come back to that, we see the hand of insecurity, at least in most of the things we'll be talking about, though even if it's GDP or even if it's inflation. But let's go to some of the controversial economic issues that came out during, at least in the last few days. That's that of NDDC, as well as that of the $418 million controversial that will be paid to some contractors or consultants, as they call themselves. Mr. Chukwu, speak to me about when you saw this news, what came to your mind? Or should I just give our viewers an intro, or a background of it? The president has seemingly approved the controversial payment of $418 million dollars in Paris Club-related judgment debts to 6 creditors. President Buhari has told the Finance Ministry to pay, and the Finance Ministry has told the DMO to issue a promissory notes. As a result of this, we've seen House of Rep members as well as governors are protesting this payment. The Kayode Fayemi-led NGF is saying that there should also be a forensic audit. This controversial $418 million to be paid to just a few individuals when we are in dire needs of funds. Mr. Chukwu, what do you think?
Okay, Nancy, I think for me, this issue of payment to the consultants who helped in securing the Paris Club refund has been on for quite some time. The governors had actually quarreled over this issue. It had actually led to some challenge problems among the governors forum, including their secretary or the chief administrator in that forum, among the governors forum. And the issues that the governors feel that there was no major contribution by a consultant in getting those funds, or that the amounts being charged is exorbitant. I think it's not something the president should just approve by fiat. You could see the governor saying that the banks should disregard the presidential order, which is a major conflict in the governance framework of the country. I think the governor should have a meeting with the president should have a meeting with the governors, and then agree on areas of disagreement. I mean, review areas of disagreement and resolve those issues. A $418 million is quite a huge amount of money to be deducted from the state's allocations or the state funds and pass on to a so-called consultant. Let's even know why the governors have major issues with paying this consultant. Let's even determine exactly the specific assignment that was executed by this consultant and the terms of contract and who signed those contracts with the consultant before you decree a payment to the consultant. I think the governors have an issue, and it's not something anybody should wave aside because the amount involved is quite huge, and it's not as if the governors, the state governments, have so much money at their disposal they want to part with about $418 million.
The issue also there would be, did the consultants do their work? If they did their work, why not pay me for what I did? Let me play the devil's advocate.
Yeah, that's why I said that in the first place, we need to look at the terms of engagement. The terms of engagement would have been specific on the responsibilities of both parties. The specifics of what the contractor ought to have done, if they carried out that assignment, and what are the payments due to the contractor, the basis of computing the fees due to the contractor. So let them go back to the terms of engagement, the contract itself, and determine, and they'll be able to resolve any disputes if there will still be any by the time you look at the terms of engagement. But like I said, it's not something you just decree. There is supposed to be a contractual agreement between the governors forum and the contractor who carried out this assignment. And what did those contracts specify? Have they been kept to the terms be made to the letters? And then if they be made to the letters, it becomes obligatory for payment to be made.
What does this really say about our contracting process or hiring of consultants? Because I know that things like this may not happen abroad. If you take a look at the percentage, 20% or so. For example, in the United States, for you to even enter a contract and get a 20%, man, you're going to, you're going to sweat it out. We're talking of 0.1, 0.5%. Mr. Chukwu, you're smiling because you know what I'm saying is the truth. Perhaps you've done business with international people. So you know what I'm saying. But in Nigeria, percentages are so humongous, 20%, 30%. And at the end of the day, we're looking at what does this really say about our contracting process or how we engage people to do businesses with us. We know what happened, was it last year? I think the issue is in court now. The government said we are not going to pay this and this and that. So what does it really say about our contracting process, and what kind of processes should we put in place to avoid these kind of things rearing its head again and again?
Okay, I will take it from two perspectives. Let me start from the public sector perspective of issues. One of the things that happen in the public sector is that because the public sector operators do not feel obligated to meet terms of contracts, they enter into any contract without looking at the fine details of the contract. Because at the back of their mind, either they feel that the obligation to make the payment will not fall under their tenure, or they will not even bother to make payment. We know of past governors in some states that we enter into any form of contract without the intention of making payment because the law is not strict and is hardly enforced. So you can help somebody for donkey years and you don't have any sense of obligation to make that payment. So a lot of instances, the public sector procurement entail signing contract they never intended to abide with. The second aspect of it is that they leading in some of these contracts are huge payback or refund to the public sector official that endorse those contracts. So in such instances, the contracts are naturally are padded with the intention of returning the excess to the contractee. And in this instance, it's not impossible because the contractees are no longer in government and maybe the contractor is still obligated to return the money to them. Present government officials or the present governors feel they are not beneficiaries to those padded values, or they feel a sense of responsibility to the society and feel that those contracts were overinflated and they now want to cut it to what the appropriate rate should be. But if you strip public sector contracts of these two major extraneous factors, then the contract will go back to what is obtainable in the private sector, where the pecuniary interest of those who are awarding the contract is not what is determines who wins the contract. When the public sector, the value systems are completely different. It's basically more of the interest of the contractee that determine who gets the contract. You have instances where the public procurement has specified at least 3 bids, and one contractor will bid for those, will submit those 3 bids in different names. So ultimately, it's a fait accompli, and then the prices are similar because they already agreed have been issued and then inflated. So by the time they are presented to the procurement committee, it's basically 3 contracts within the same range, but all behind it's actually one contractor, and the contract is given out with an inflated price. And that's why we're not getting value for money in many instances. You realize that in several procurement cases, the value for money is missing in Nigeria, and that's why we're not able to build infrastructure the rate other countries are building, because the resource we use to build a small infrastructure would have been used to build 10 times of what we have committed it to. So you have to deal with the value system in the public sector, which is underpinned by corruption, the public interest, the interest of the individuals who are awarding the contract, and the fact that we don't have a really independent body that will scrutinize this contract and determine the value for money in them. And finally, the fact that the governors, there's nothing that compels a government officials or government agency to pay according to the terms of the contract. And you have instances where the governors will owe you until they leave government, and the next government will not even bother to pay you.
Mr. Chukwu, since we're talking about corruption, let's dovetail into the NDDC matter. Earlier this year, we saw the drama that played out at the National Assembly, the off your mic saga, off your mic, off your mic, off your mic. Now, we're seeing that the reports says, you're smiling. You know, in my place, they say, let me say it in my language. Ajoku na swamu. That's now bad. Bad things make people laugh. You know, we're not supposed to be laughing or smiling over these kind of issues. You know, but what I'm trying to say in essence is that from the NDDC audit report, we know that the Auditor General indicted the NDDC and did say that about 90.9 billion naira spent on 176 projects could not be accounted for. The NDDC has gotten so far about $40 billion since its creation. But if we go to the Niger Delta now, if we equate the monies that it has gotten by the NDDC and the projects on ground, that will call for question. What do you think about this audit report? 13,000 abandoned projects, in fact, in the Niger Delta, 13,000 of it.
Nancy, we must recognize when we talk of corruption that it looks like it is the seat of corruption, one of the seats of corruption in the country. We have an agency where from the day it was set up till the current day, including all the people who are even mounting about fighting corruption and this, it's been entrenched. It's a system that is basically a cash machine for for governments in power. And you realize that several contracts of NDDC, there's no value for money, and assuming if they're executed, we've seen some of the most shoddy jobs ever seen in the world executed by NDDC contractors, and they are paid. We know there are several instances where contracts are awarded and not executed to the specifications, and they are paid. Because basically, the contracts given to in NDDC are given largely for political patronage. And that means that they are given to one, people who have no competence to execute the jobs. Two, they give out contracts that are not measurable, like clearing water hyacinth and desilting and all those things that you can't really measure. These are basically conduits for people in power of whatever is the ruling party to line their pockets or to meet political patronage. So it's not surprising to me that we're seeing instances where several contracts of 13,000 were not executed. But let me also mention to you, Nancy, you know the painful and unfortunate about any of this is that even the genuine contractors are also not paid. Those who really did the job, the kind of kickbacks, I can tell you for free that the kind of kickbacks that those in authority demand of genuine contractors make it impossible for even genuine contractors to go and execute jobs. Because if you finish doing a contract that was objectively obtained for those who are outsiders and eventually get one or two jobs, and they ask you to return 30 or 40% of the contract value as kickback, there is no way you will go and do that contract and return those funds. And if you fail to return it, they sit on your money and they make sure they pauperize you. So the challenge you have in NDDC is enormous. This, what you're seeing is tip of the iceberg. I think if we have to retain this intervention agency, we need to drastically review its governance framework. And I would recommend actually, because it's not just enough for us to criticize what's going on, it's not right. I would recommend that we need to bring in members of the international oil companies that are contributors to the fund of NDDC to form part of the supervising board of NDDC. The NDDC should have people nominated from Shell, from Ajib, from Total, all the major oil companies that are contributors to the NDDC fund, and maybe some of the independent local oil producers to sit on the board of the supervising board of NDDC and ensure that appropriate governance standards are instilled in that agency, just the way you have in LNG. But if you leave it to government appointees who are appointed purely based on political patronage, we're going to continue to live with this kind of slits that has made it impossible for us to get the value of the creation of NDDC. You go and look at the Nigerian Delta. You can barely point to lasting or landmark projects that have been executed by NDDC. I can come back 10 years time and say this project was done by NDDC. Go and look at the roads they are constructing. 1 year down the line after the release, they are supposed off, and then nobody takes any rap for that. So it wasn't surprising to me because I have observed NDDC closely, and I realized that look, it's just a conduit for settling political patronage.
Do you agree with the oil producing companies, oil producing communities that the NDDC should be scrapped and are replaced with a host communities development commission? Do you agree with that? And with what you said, that bringing the IOCs on board, we know that the NDDC gets its money from allocation also from the FG. There's a 3% royalty from the total budgets of the IOCs, as well as even grants from international organizations. So when the president sees this, I wonder what he would act on, because he's also the Minister of Petroleum.
Okay, what I would think is that scrapping NDDC with the host community fund is will not solve the problem. NDDC is supposed to be a regional intervention agency. They should have been issued. They were supposed to have developed a master plan for the entire Niger Delta. They are supposed to construct projects that are cut across the entire Niger Delta. They should have integrated the entire Niger Delta region into a single development zone, which host community fund will not address. The host community fund is supposed to apply specifically to host communities, and those host communities will get returns based on what is produced within their area. But the NDDC should have integrated. For instance, if we have the East-West Road, assuming it was taken over by NDDC, by now we should have an interlinking highway that connects all the 9 Niger Delta states or NDDC affected states, we should have critical infrastructure like development of deep sea ports that will bring lasting development. We should have stable power supply on some national grid that will provide power supply to that area. We should have intervention at educational state, educational level, improving the quality of education available to the children from that area, improving their access to a higher level of skills so that ultimately they would not need to enter into any of these criminal activities like bombing of pipelines or go back to the swamps and begin to attack the oil companies. Those things should be overriding developmental objectives, which the host communities may not be most suited to. The NDDC should focus on what you may call region-wide projects that are of enduring nature. I think there are two different objectives. Then on strengthening the governance standards, I did mention that if you look at the framework of natural gas, it has worked well for us, where the international oil companies sit on the board, on the governance board of LNG, and we also have government appointees. But ultimately, if you have that in NDDC, because they have financial stake in NDDC, if we bring them in to sit on the board of, they are not likely going to be subject to pecuniary interest. And if you have, for instance, a board of a 10-man board where the government has 4 appointees who are appointed based on political patronage, they have 6 other appointees who are independent-minded professionals. The independent-minded professionals will bring to bear their competencies and their reputation and integrity to really define and reshape the direction of NDDC. I think that's, for me, is the way to go. But scrapping it is like throwing away the bathwater, baby with the bathwater.
Okay.
I think there are opportunities for reform and transformation of NDDC, which the government should look at.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chukwu, for your perspectives this morning. Have a very fantastic week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.